Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about what I've learned with regard to grieving. I've learned some of it from books, some of it from experience, and some of it from the Lord. The death of a child to suicide, which we're seeing so much of today, is probably the hardest grief that anyone can experience. With this kind of death, in addition to the ongoing loss and never-ending grief, there's guilt and questions in a parent's heart. Questions like, why didn't I see it coming? Why didn't I see the signs? And self-punishing statements like, I should have seen it coming. If only I had done this or I had done that, I could have stopped it. Then there's a stigma on top of this kind of a death that is really difficult. People don't know what to say to people who have lost a child to suicide. They struggle to understand why someone would choose suicide, and some even go as far as to pin blame to try to make sense of the suicide. In their mind, there must be a reason or a cause. Unless someone has experienced personally the suicide of someone that they knew and loved, they can rarely recognize that a person was struggling with an illness. In my case, I lost my daughter, and a close relative chose to blame me for her suicide. I understand now, but I didn't understand then. See, people find suicide a very scary thing. Parents do. The thought that if it could happen to them, it could happen to me is, it's too hard for people to think about. It makes life too unpredictable. It's too scary. So it's easier for some people to manufacture a cause. Because it gives them a sense of security. And I'll give you an example. They may rationalize that this happened to that parent because they did this or they didn't do that right. Fill in the blank with whatever. And because I'm different, it could never happen to my child. Thinking this way is maybe easier for them to deal with the uncertainty of life and the possibility of suicide. But saying this kind of thing to a parent who has lost their adult child to suicide is very destructive to an already grieving parent. In my case, I strongly believe that it added significantly to my trauma, and it nearly destroyed me emotionally. The last thing that anyone should ever say to a grieving parent is to suggest that somehow they must have been the cause. Having talked to a lot of other grieving mothers who have lost children to suicide, it's all too common that they've had such things said to them by family members, by friends. It's also very common for them to already feel guilt for their child's death. The self-punishing, again, that I had told you about, where they said I should have recognized, is something most parents of children who commit suicide struggle to overcome. We know that the adversary is like a roaring lion. He's seeking whom he may devour. And I believe much of this self-punishing comes from the adversary. But it's hard to sort our thoughts when we're traumatized. It's hard to recognize that these kinds of thoughts are meant to destroy us when we're at our weakest. And it takes time to get to a place where we can think rationally about the origin of our thoughts. We're too emotional. We're unable at that point to recognize the work of the adversary. The thing is, there's no pat answer for why people choose suicide. It happens to parents living on the same street as their child. It happens to parents living in the same home as their child. I heard of a young man who celebrated his birthday. I think he was 16, and they had a big party for him and everything seemed wonderful. And later that same day, they found him hanging in a tree in the back garden. It's devastating. I can't even imagine what it must feel like to see your child in that situation. It can happen without any obvious signs. It happens unexpectedly. And it is very scary for people. And if it could happen to them, it can happen to anyone. You know, a good book to read is the story of Marie Osmond's son. He took his life by suicide. And I'll leave a link in the description below. But in the case of her son's death, again, there were no signs. You know, only after the fact do you start to see, oh, maybe this is what that was. And, you know, you don't always see it. So what's the best way to help someone who's grieving? Well, I discovered a book that was a helpful tool for me. It wasn't a catch-all. It didn't solve everything. In fact, it didn't even touch on suicide. But it did kind of help me to understand the grieving process and to help me navigate my daughter's death. And I'll put that link in the description below as well. Everyone really should read it, in my opinion. Whether you're personally struggling with grief or you know somebody that is currently struggling with grief and you want to know how to help them. Because, you know, let's face it, I know personally before this happened to me that I was very uncomfortable. I didn't always know what to say to people. It wasn't, you know, I felt awkward. And I think that that the book helped me to understand that there's no straight line to grief. There's no formula for getting over the loss of someone we love. You know, they say, oh, first you have this, then you have this. And no, it's not like that. Trust me. You will have these different things happen, but they could go all over the place. There is no timeline. There is no way to get through grief. It just is something that you have to take each day. It's an unwanted journey. Everyone is different. Every circumstance is different. And some people, they seem to get through grief better than others. And other people struggle and find the journey extremely difficult. And in the early days after my daughter's suicide, I couldn't even imagine a future without her. Thinking about tomorrow, all my dreams, all my goals, anything that I had thought that I wanted to do, it was gone. I cried all the time. I would often go in the shower and bawl my eyes out because I didn't want to constantly cry about around my poor husband, because he was suffering through all this with me. It wasn't his daughter. She was from a previous marriage, but he still loved her, he still cared, and he loved me, and he was worried for me. And he didn't even want to go to work because I was a real mess. And he was afraid. He was afraid, will I come home and will I find my wife still there, you know. So I suffered with post-traumatic stress disorder. I developed severe depression and horrible anxiety. And I just felt like I could no longer trust the world. It was like someone had taken the world and shook it upside down, and there was no longer anything predictable or safe. It affected my confidence, and it affected me so badly that I couldn't even get in my car and drive 2 miles on a straight road to the local shop to do my groceries. I was just terrified to get in the car. I was terrified of everything. And you know, you don't expect that. You never anticipate that something will happen in your life that can impact you that way. They tried me on all kinds of medicines. Some of them were just too much for me because my blood pressure's already low, and I just felt like I was going to quit breathing. You know, I was just going to quit and drop, and you know, nothing. Just very little of walking up an incline was too much for me. It's taken me 2 years to even begin to move forward. Now, I know that's not a luxury that everyone has. A lot of people have to go back to work right away, and they don't have someone to kind of help them through it. And that must be so difficult. I couldn't imagine it. But anyway, I was fortunate. God blessed me with a really wonderful husband who has been a rock. He's been so supportive and so understanding and so encouraging. And he never was hard on me. He never expected me to snap out of it or anything like that. In fact, I was probably harder on myself than anybody ever could be. I was frustrated. I couldn't understand why I was thinking this way, or couldn't do this or couldn't do that. I was impatient with myself because I felt like I on top of all the guilt and feeling like a failure as a mom and all these other things, I also felt like my cognitive abilities were impacted, and I know that they were, and my ability to do things and concentrate and stuff was just totally messed up. So these are all the things that a person could potentially be dealing with when they're going through serious grief. And as I said, this is the first time in 2 years that I've been able to move forward. And so that's why I started this vlog. It's partially to help with my healing, to challenge myself to move forward. But it's also because I'm hopeful that sharing the tough lessons that I've learned in my Christian walk will somehow help someone else that sees this video. I would say the best way to help someone who's suffering with grief is to be there for them. Not to say things to make them feel better. Those kinds of words ring hollow, trust me. Things like, oh, they're better off now. They're not suffering anymore. Someday you'll understand why this happened, and time will heal your pain. Just don't. I know that people mean well, and that's the only reason they're doing it. They're not trying to be hurtful. They just don't know what to do. Please stop yourself from saying these things. People, sometimes say things because they think that it's going to make the person feel better, or that they think they should say something kind. Actually, the best thing that you can do is just spend time with them. Just be with them. Be quiet. Listen to them. Hear their pain. Have a cup of tea with them. Just so they know that there's somebody there that they can talk to and share things with. Be in their pain with them. And this takes courage. It's not easy. I think most people, and I was guilty, avoid it. It's too scary. Do something kind for them. Check up on them. Make them a meal without their asking. Don't go to them and say, oh, is there anything that I can do for you? If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. No, because most of the time they're too depressed to ask. Just do something. Just do something loving. Take them for a walk. Say, let's go for a walk. Be there for them when they want to close off, because boy, I wanted to close off. I just wanted to shut the curtains and quit living and not have anybody. I didn't want to go anywhere. My husband would plan things for the weekend without my knowledge, and then I'd be upset with him. I would be mad because he didn't let me sit at home and be by myself. He made me get up and go because he wanted me to get better. But someone who doesn't have anyone, they might need somebody. You may be all they've got to help them through. And this is probably one of the most loving things that anybody can do. But above everything else, pray for them all the time. God listens. And I can tell you from experience, God sent a neighbor to me. I didn't know her. I'll call her Helen. I'd only just moved into the property that I was renting at the time, that we were renting at the time. And I had gone away on holiday. And when we came back, it was like the next day we got the news. And I hadn't even met her. But I'll tell you this, she would come over and she would just sit with me. Or she would coax me, let's go walk your dogs and get some fresh air. She didn't advise me. She didn't try to say things to make me feel better. She understood my grief because she'd lost her husband not very long before I lost my daughter. And that had been a husband of many years. And I know that she was sent by God. Looking back now, I know that he sent her. And she's become one of my dearest friends because of her loving kindness. So I want to say two things in closing. If you're currently suffering with depression from the loss of a loved one, please don't be afraid to talk to your doctor. You may need some medication for a while. Sometimes things overwhelm us. We're only human, Remember, Luke was a doctor. He was a physician. And God gives us physicians to help us. And if it's been a while since you lost someone and you're personally struggling, don't be afraid to talk to someone. Maybe talk to a counselor, or a lot of the local churches have people who love and help you and listen and be there for you. Some of them do counseling just as a ministry. And I'll tell you, counseling by the Word of God has got to be the best counseling. It's better than all those other types of counseling, in my opinion. For a Christian, it is. And if you're considering suicide, please talk to someone. Please. It may seem at the time like suicide is the only answer to terminate your pain, but suicide is the worst solution. Your life, even if you can't presently see or understand how at the moment, is important in this world. If you leave, you're going to rip a hole in this life and in the hearts of so many people who care about you. You have value. You are needed. You must have an important purpose. And here's why. Because the adversary is trying so hard to convince you to give up. Listen, never give up. And never be ashamed of your suffering mentally. We all have struggles in this life. Jesus said, in this life you're going to have trials and tribulations. None of us are immune. Some of us have physical problems. Some of us were born with physical problems. And some of us have mental or developmental problems. It isn't a bad thing. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. You know, and even if you're perfectly normal and then you go through really hard stress and hardships, you can develop depression. You can develop sickness and PTSD. Look at our soldiers, you know. We're human and these bodies are fragile, and so are our minds. So there is a way forward. Please talk to someone if you feel tired of the battles and are losing your hope. You can get through this and live and have better days ahead. And I'm going to leave the numbers in the description below to the suicide hotlines here and also in the States. You know, it's on the rise today. We see it all the time. And I may even do a video on surviving suicide. If it's something viewers would like to know more about, just let me know in the comments below. And before I leave, I just want to say, may God bless you today and may He provide you with everything you need. All you need is to ask. And please feel free to comment and share this video with anyone you think it might bless. I'll talk to you later. God bless.